Greetings, mortals. It is I, Remortis, coming at you with another guide to Baldur's Gate 3. This time, a continuation of the Necronomicon, Chapter 3, Supporting Your Undead Army as a Necromancer Wizard, where we will go over tips, tricks, and spells to aid your minions and yourself through your adventures. Let's get right into it, shall we? As a Necromancer, we have a few key features that we should go over. Starting with Grim Harvest, which will let us regain hit points anytime we unalive a creature with our spells, equal to the spell's level, or times 3, if that spell is a Necromancy spell. A pretty neat way to keep ourselves healthy throughout the game. I wouldn't rely entirely on its healing, but it's still nice to have another source. Then we move on to our most prominent feature at level 6. We'll gain Undead Thralls, which simply buffs our undead minions that we create to deal extra damage equal to our proficiency and have extra hit points equal to our wizard level. This can be all the difference of having your minions survive an extra attack than normal. And at level 10, we get Inured to Undead, which grants us resistance to necrotic damage and our max HP can't be reduced. It's an okay feature, but honestly, it comes far too late for it to be relevant in Baldur's Gate 3. It would have been pretty solid in Act 2 though. As a wizard, we have limited spell slots that primarily must be restored through long rests. So we must use our spells and resources wisely. That being said, there are a few ways we can regain a few spell slots in between rests, as well as other means to preserve those slots, such as Arcane Restoration, which will let us restore up to a certain amount of spell slots based on our level, to a maximum of level 5. But we can combine these to restore a level 1 and a level 2 slot, for example. But let's go over which spells we should consider in addition to our Necromancer spells. Beginning with Cantrips. These spells can be cast as much as you want in between rests without expending your resources, and there are some very solid choices here to aid us in a variety of situations, aside from just raw damage, like with Firebolt. Bone Chill is obviously a solid cantrip and a necromancy spell that does respectable damage and also prevents the target from healing, and can impose disadvantage on undead targets, even if they're immune to necrotic damage. Shocking Grasp is a great cantrip to allow you to escape out of melee by preventing your target from taking reactions, meaning you can move safely away, and if they're wearing metal armor, or are metal armor, you can get advantage on this attack. And for non-combat cantrips, Friends can be a solid choice to help you pass charisma checks, which is pretty important for a main character. But just be careful, because when the spell wears off, they'll realize a spell has been cast on them, and they'll try to look for you, and they don't take too kindly to that. So keep your distance after you cast the spell. And Minor Illusion can be utilized to distract NPCs so you can sneak by, or maybe dabble in some sleight of hand to steal things. And as for level 1 spells, we have quite a few to choose from. Magic Missiles is a very reliable damaging spell that never misses, unless the opponent uses the shield spell, and there's not very many opponents in the game that actually use it. It can be perfect to help finish off targets inflicted with Crawling Gnaw to create more zombies. And you can deal some considerable damage with it as well by using certain items showcased in my Magic Missile video, which can deal upwards of 80 damage as early as Act 1, and even more the further acts you go. Shield is a great defensive spell to help your survivability, and will only be castable if it will result in an attack missing. A very good spell to have. Thunderwave is one of my favorite spells in Baldur's Gate 3, dealing solid AoE damage, but can also knock opponents away from you, and more importantly, off of ledges. And there are plenty of ritual utility spells such as Featherfall to reduce falling speed, Longstrider to increase movement speed, and Enhanced Leap to increase your jump distance. Longstrider can be upcasted to target more units, but this will expand a spell slot. But the buff lasts until you take a short rest, so it's still pretty nice to have on your undead, so they can get even closer, even faster. The Grease spell can be a useful crowd control spell by making your opponents fall over, and potentially wasting their turn, but be warned as your undead are very clumsy and are likely to fall over with it too. And Color Spray and Sleep are both decent crowd control spells in the early game, but they fall off pretty hard as you go up against increasingly stronger enemies. But a great advantage that wizards have is that they can learn spells by scribing scrolls, meaning they can read a spell and so that meaning they can read a spell and scribe it into their spellbook, so we can potentially acquire every spell available to wizards. So don't feel too bad about picking spells that are only good for a small portion of the game, since you can always learn other spells and swap them out. Level 2 spells grant us a few decent options when it comes to supporting your undead army, but more so for helping our wizard help the army, with spells like Misty Step and Invisibility, which can be used to safely traverse the battlefield, but have great out-of-combat applications as well to get around danger or terrain, or just to skip puzzles entirely. There's also a couple of defensive options in Mirror Image and Blur, with some decent AoE options in Shatter and Cloud of Daggers should you need a little extra AoE damage, both of which won't ruin corpses. And don't forget about Web, which is a great way to restrain your enemies, and can also create a nice landing pad to jump on from higher heights. But your undead will often get caught in it, so be careful where you place it. On to level 3 spells where things start to get interesting. One of my favorite spells to assist our undead with is Stinking Cloud. It's a massive AoE that can potentially crowd control your enemies by making them skip their turn from being nauseous. And it does not infect any of our undead, since it is a poison-based attack. So this is a pretty sweet ability to use to keep your opponents locked down. They can move out of it, but they'll end up skipping their turn, and then your minions can go in there and clean things up. Glyph of Warding is another great spell to use that is incredibly versatile. It can do all types of elemental damage, but there's also a few other spells in there too, such as the knockbacks and sleeping abilities. And there's plenty of AoE damage spells with level 3 spells, such as a classic Fireball and Lightning Bolt. And of course, be careful not to blast your own undead, and also be careful that these two spells will likely damage corpses, preventing them from being raised into more undead. Haste is a very good 3rd level spell, but you'd only be able to cast it on yourself. Meanwhile, Slow is a solid option to weaken up to 6 targets. I'd argue this be a better pick to support your minions than Haste, but it's your call of course. And of course, you'd probably want to grab Counterspell to protect you, your minions, and your party from a variety of spell threats. For 4th level spells, nothing here screams as a must-have. Dimension Door and Greater Invisibility are some solid spells to move around the battlefield in and out of combat, but Dimension Door lets you bring a friend as well. Wall of Fire is a great damaging concentration spell, but obviously will hurt your undead minions, so be careful where you place it, especially when you have some undead that are controlled by the AI. Ice Storm is also a solid AoE spell, but causes the ground to become icy, which your undead will undoubtedly slip and slide all over the place with. And then we have Conjure Minor Elemental, which can be a solid spell to supplement your army, providing elemental support, with a little bit of variety. Typically, you'd use the Aether or the Mud methods to spread mud and, in turn, disadvantage to everything. So again, choose what you'd like for level 4 spells. Nothing here will make or break your necromantic capabilities. And of course, you'll probably end up using the 4th level spell slot to upcast your Animate Dead spell to have up to 4 minions from that spell. And level 5 spells is when things start to get interesting again. We get access to Cloud Kill, which is perhaps one of the strongest concentration spells available to us, while also providing pseudo crowd control in the way of causing everything inside to be heavily obscured, and dealing poison damage with each turn, which your minions, again, aren't affected by. This time we get Proper Conjure Elemental, which is yet another versatile spell to help supplement our army with a much stronger elemental, and they have a variety of abilities to choose from, so you might want to play around with them and see what each one can provide you. We also get access to Telekinesis, which is a pretty sweet spell, but I feel it comes a little too late in the game, but it's still great to use. There's a lot of fun applications you can use with it, especially if you're familiar with Telekinesis in Divinity Original Sin. There are also a few special level 5 spells that you can acquire from raiding Sorcerous Sundries. There's some pretty neat spells that do some solid damage, but you can live without them. And keep in mind, Animate Dead, when cast as a 5th level spell, will let you summon a ghoul. And on to level 6 spells. While these spells can be powerful, I don't think they're absolutely necessary. You could use your 6th level spell slot to upcast another spell, or use the spells here. We'll get access to Create Undead to summon a mummy and Circle of Death, as mentioned in Chapter 1. Both spells are pretty decent, and Chain Lightning can be a really solid damaging spell here too. Although in my opinion, most of these level 6 spells aren't incredibly useful, as I feel they're much better when they are upcasted beyond level 6. And sadly, in Baldur's Gate 3, we cannot do that. Now, on to useful items that can make our lives as necromancers, and spellcasters for that matter, a lot more easier. Beginning with one of the most powerful swords in the game, Falar Aluve. As mentioned in the Magic Missile Guide, this can yield some incredible damage stacking potential. But for the purposes of necromancy, we're actually interested in the Sing ability of the blade, which will increase the hit chance of all allies nearby for 1d4, just like the Bless spell, which can stack with it even. The radius is rather small, so this may be better suited to one of your meatheads in the party. You know, the melee folk. There's also a circlet in the game that will grant resistances to minions in a similar radius, which again is probably better suited for one of your meathead companions, as they'll be up front, much closer than your wizard, ideally. There's also gloves that can grant all resistances to your minions, except psychic, but it comes with the cost of them going berserk and attacking you and your allies. So I don't think it's really worth the risk. And then onto items that will restore or preserve your limited spell slots. The Pearl of Power, which can be found in Act 1, which is purchased from the Hobgoblin's friend in the Myconid camp, which will let us restore a spell slot up to 3rd level. This is a pretty awesome amulet to have throughout the game, that you can swap in, restore your spell slot, and swap to another. Personally, I tend to use 1st and 3rd level spells the most, so it's nice to get a little extra mileage out of some of these spells. The Spellcrux amulet is possibly the most important item you can acquire as any spellcaster. It will restore any spell slot, including level 6, which is worn by the Warden in the Moonrise Tower's prison. End her, and this shall be yours. Any item that can let you cast a spell is worth holding on to, and then swap to another after you exhaust the spell. Staves such as Arcane Blessing, which will grant Bless, is fantastic to help your party or your minions. Staff of Crones or Melf's First Staff can provide you offensive spells, for example, and then swap to another staff or item to use its spell and move on. Then there are a few other staves, such as the Spell Sparkler, that can allow you to deal some crazy damage in combination with other damage-writing items, which again you can find in the Magic Missile video. And eventually, when you reach Act 3, there's a couple Necromancer staves you'll be able to get your hands on. You can find the Hollow Staff if you knock out or unalive the Circus Ringmaster, which you could knock out without any punishment during a certain clown attack. They also possess the Spellmite Gloves, which are also incredible for any caster. So keep an eye out for this person. Then there's also a really nice staff from a mummy in Baldur's Gate proper. You should also keep an eye out for items that will enhance your spell DC, which in turn will make your spells more likely to hit. And on to the fun or unique items that will further your necromantic abilities, such as Bitter Divorce, which is a strange wand found in the Hag's Lair, which will let you continuously summon a zombie named Connor throughout the game without needing a corpse. But he also doesn't spread his disease like other zombies will. And he only lasts for 10 turns though, but can be recast again out of combat with no resources. It seems a bit clunky to try to cast him in combat though, so just be sure to have him around before you engage a fight. And then there's an interesting interaction with Gale in the Moonrise Towers, in Balthazar's room, which will let Gale craft a moon lantern himself. But this lantern also lets you create a shade from a corpse, a neat minion to have to add to your undead roster. So depending on what stage of the game you're in, you'll be working in tandem with your party and your minions to help secure kills or to ensure targets with Crawling Gnaw perish first, to yield even more zombies, and this can again create some crazy snowballs. But be sure to utilize spell granting items and scrolls to preserve your own spell slots. And don't forget you can cast cantrips again without using your resources. And depending on your race, you may have access to other armors and shields to increase your own survivability. That being said, I imagine many folks will utilize Gale to be the party's necromancer. And he does a solid job at it, not to mention his interest in the Book of Thay, and his interaction with the Lantern in Act 2. And being a human, he'll be able to use light armor and shields. Not only will light armor and shields be able to increase his armor class, but there are also many light armors and shields that increase initiative, which can always be good, so that you move first and dish out some damage or crowd control, whatever you and your minions require. And that concludes this chapter of the Necronomicon. If you enjoyed this guide and wish to see more chapters, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Feel free to ask any questions below in the comments, and I'll be sure to answer them to the best of my ability. I will be compiling the questions and answers on the Necronomicon Reddit post, as well as a copy of the Necronomicon in my Discord. That way you don't have to keep watching the videos over and over. With that being said, I hope to see you in the next chapter, where we will cover everything on the Spore Druid. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Farewell for now.